Today, we'll be looking at a client example of a 62 and 61-year-old couple with $1 million inside of a traditional IRA, $50,000 in cash savings, and a home worth about $450,000 that's fully paid off. For this edition of the Whiteboard Retirement Plan, we're going to dive into the timing of their Social Security payments, their IRA distribution strategy, Roth Conversions, their investment strategy, as well as discuss some potential risks they might face. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining another episode of the Planning for Retirement podcast. This is our fourth volume of the Whiteboard Retirement Plan. My name is Kevin Lau. I'm your host. I'm also the owner and financial planner at Imagine Financial Security. We help individuals over 50 who have saved at least $1 million for retirement maximize their retirement spending, minimize their lifetime tax bill, and worry less about the financial markets. If you're interested in learning more about working with us one-on-one, visit our website at www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com, or you can start with the Retirement Readiness Questionnaire linked in the description. We look forward to learning about you and helping you with your planning journey. Before we dive into today's episode, for those of you that are listening to the audio only, I highly encourage watching this on video form. We do this both on Spotify and on YouTube. And while you're at it, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube. We're also posting other videos outside of the regular podcasts on Tuesdays. Video is key for these Whiteboard Retirement Plan breakdowns. But if you cannot watch the video, maybe you're in your car listening or just don't have access to video, it's okay. I would still encourage you to listen to this episode. I'm going to do my best to verbally paint you a visual here in terms of the value adds that you're going to want to take away. And then you can decide if you need or want to watch the video form at a later date. But I'll do my best for those of you listening on audio to make it useful for all of you. With that said, I'll see you at the whiteboard. All right, everybody, welcome to the whiteboard. Just threw a few facts and figures at you that I want to start out with Jane and John. Okay, so John is 62 and Jane is currently 61. They have a goal for just baseline cash flow. Okay, so just to continue the lifestyle that they're comfortable with of about $6,000 per month or $72,000 on an annual basis. Their big goal, though, in retirement is they want to enjoy travel. Okay, they were on the grind for 40 plus years. They're at this stage now. Their son, he's off and running. He's doing his own thing. He's got his kids, and they want to enjoy time with the grandkids, but they also want to enjoy travel and maximize fulfillment. They don't have extravagant taste. They don't need, $50,000 a year for travel, but $10,000 a year is going to be their travel budget. Okay. So obviously we need to figure out what is the income plan? What is going to be their cash flow plan from things like Social Security, from their investment portfolio? So what I want to do is I want to start with the assets, in this tax makeup, because I just wanted to point out that most of the people that are retiring now, this is sort of what it looks like. Okay, the numbers may be a little different, but this is what it looks like. A little bit in taxable. For them, they have $50,000 in the taxable bucket. And so if you're listening on audio, I've drawn up three different columns: taxable assets, tax-deferred assets, and then tax-free assets. On the taxable side, they have $50,000, and this is cash savings. This is what they have been living off over the last couple of years since they retired, since John and Jane retired. The majority of their portfolio is inside of an IRA in the tax-deferred side. IRA. They don't have any money in the tax-free yet, but I just want to tee up that we did run through some scenarios on Roth conversion. So there could be a potential argument to move some of this tax-deferred money into the tax-free side. Okay, but now they're in this position now. They've been living on cash savings, and I know why that was. And let me tell you what happened over the last couple of years. They entertained this meeting with a broker. I'll call him a broker that works with their mom. And the broker is not a fiduciary, but I think tried to do a good job for them, tried to create an investment strategy for this IRA. I just don't think it really resonated with them. And I think it was because they were throwing a lot of really complicated investment strategies at them, throwing up a bunch of numbers. But most importantly, they didn't really lead with financial planning and what the long-term vision was for their plan. They were just leading with the investment strategy. And so I think it led to this our clients who are now working with us shut down. They're just like, oh my gosh, this is a little bit overwhelming. And so what they ended up doing, I'm drawing a little pie chart here on my whiteboard to show you the distribution that they selected. Okay, so I have three percentages: 70%, 20%, and 10%. Okay, so the 10% actually represents cash. So they have 10% of cash in addition to the $50,000 inside of the IRA. They have 20% in equities. So I'm going to abbreviate this. 10% is C, 20% is E, that's equity. So a few stocks in the S&P 500 basically. But then 70% is in the F side, which is fixed income. So really the allocation, the percentage distribution that I would say is this is a 20-80 portfolio, 20% in equities, 80% in fixed income or cash alternatives. So if you really compare this to the benchmark of one of the benchmarks that I don't like using, but this rule of thumb of own your age in bonds, I just think it gets too conservative too early. But if you use the benchmark, they should have about 60% in bonds, not 80% in bonds. So right there, if we just kind of do a little pulse check, they're way too conservative relative to their ages, but also their time horizon. Jane has some longevity in her gene pool. And so this is one of those risks that we're going to talk about throughout is this idea of longevity, and therefore inflation risk comes into the picture and also long-term care risk. Okay, so on the surface, $1 million portfolio sounds great, but all of a sudden now we need to sort of unpack, okay, what is that expected rate of return? And what's that expected rate of return over the long run relative to inflation? Right now, it probably feels okay. Interest rates are, over 4.5%, on the 10-year bond, the 10-year treasury. That's pretty attractive. But long-term, interest rates are probably going to normalize over the course of the next few years, maybe come down to that 3%-ish level for risk-free rates of return. Okay, then what does that do? How does that compare to inflation? Is inflation at 2 or 2.5%? So therefore, your net rate of return after inflation is maybe 1 or 0.5% a year. That's a problem, especially relative to the rate of withdrawal, which is what we're going to talk about here in just a second. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to run, okay, what is the portfolio? What is the asset mix that makes sense for this IRA? Okay, so we looked at all the allocation scenarios. Okay, we don't like to be 100% in equities for a client that's retired. That's just too uncomfortable, okay, especially for someone who's drawing down the portfolio and, they need income. Let's say they need income in a bear market like a 2008, 2009. So we need some fixed income in the portfolio. The question is how much? Okay, and looking at all the calculations, looking at all the potential models, there are several options for them. Okay, they could have been anywhere from, let's say, 40-ish% in equities all the way up to about, maybe 75% in equities in terms of their risk capacity. But the risk tolerance wasn't there. Okay, it wasn't aligned with 80 to 85% in equities or even 70% in equities. So what we did is we said, okay, you know what? Let's land on a percentage of equities that you're comfortable with in terms of experiencing volatility. That ended up being 60%. Okay, so 60% in the E and then 40% here on the fixed income side. So that was the target allocation. Now, the problem was how do we get from point A to point B? Because they actually reached out to us last fall, and it was an interesting time because, they wanted to make a change on this one, but now we're coming off back-to-back years. The S&P 500 was positive 20% for 2 years in a row. And they had this big concern of hey, they were on the sidelines during 2023 and 2024, probably no fault to their own, but, ultimately bad advice from their broker, not really leading with financial planning. And therefore they ended up being way too conservative too early. And they also, by the way, experienced a ton of volatility unexpectedly during 2022. I mean, 70% in fixed income was down 15% in 2022. So not only did they think they were getting conservative, but they also got penalized for that. So it was tough because, on the surface, it was this makes sense. And they even said this too. This makes sense. We just can't wrap our heads around moving all of that fixed income over into the equity markets, going from 20% in equities all the way up to 60% overnight, especially with the pending election in November, potential volatility there. It had nothing to do with politics, but it was just there's an election. Doesn't that mean there's a lot of volatility? I mean, sometimes. And obviously, Trump winning the election in November, we're seeing some volatility in the fourth quarter of 2024. We've seen some volatility early in 2025 when it comes to the stock market. And so I don't blame them for being concerned with that. And so what we elected to do was we elected to dollar cost average from their current allocation into this 60-40 mix over the course of 3 months. So each month we moved a third of the allocation that we wanted over to the equity side. And now we're sitting there at a 60-40 portfolio and it looks great. But I think really what the lesson there was, if you look at all the studies, statistically speaking, most people think dollar cost averaging actually is the way to go, slowly getting money into the market. But if you actually look at the studies internally, lump sum investments for most periods of time beat out dollar cost averaging. And it makes sense because markets most of the time are positive, but the 20% it's not, then those dollar cost averaging played in your favor. And so optimally, yeah, lump sum kind of makes sense. But in this scenario, it was back-to-back 2 years of the S&P 500 plus 20%, pending election. They were concerned about this. This is their life savings that they need to live on over the next 30 plus years. They were very uncomfortable just going overnight into that portfolio and selling out of their fixed income, going into equities. So the dollar cost averaging just helped them sleep well over those next 3 months as we transition to the portfolio. So it just kind of says like, just because studies have said something or something is more optimal doesn't mean that aligns with like the behavioral aspect of financial planning. And this is legitimate for folks that are approaching retirement or recently retired, because it's like, again, you're not working. Like you can't like say, oh, you know what? I don't care if the market's down. I'm just going to recover and I'm going to keep saving into the portfolio. Like you are living on this portfolio. You don't want to experience that downturn and have no financial plan in place. So I just say this because behavioral coaching is big. And, this is what we pride ourselves, partly what we pride ourselves on is, yes, there are some financial optimizations, but helping coach clients through the ups and downs of market uncertainty is a big deal. But what was also cool about this, I'll just kind of throw this out there, just remember this number, is 40% of the portfolio would be invested in fixed income. So if you take 40% of $1 million, that's $400,000. Okay. And if we just kind of look at their portfolio needs, and we're going to go over this in a second here in terms of cash flow, but $400,000. Okay. I'm going to kind of do a little teaser on this one. They need about $60,000 in the beginning phase of retirement in order to meet their cash flow needs. That's about 6% of the portfolio. But again, $60,000. If you take 400,000, divide that by 60,000, that's between 7 to 8 years of cash flow needs locked in on the fixed income side right away. So if you think about the worst bear markets that we've experienced, the most recent one, 2022, didn't take very long for the market to recover, maybe 15-ish months, 16 months. 2008, a little over 4 years. That was the worst one we've ever seen in our lifetime, okay? Going back to the Great Depression. So 4 years, worst case scenario, hopefully we're not going to go through another 2008 anytime soon. But if we did, they have over 7 years of their cash flow needs locked in on fixed income. And typically in those periods of volatility, the fixed income holds pretty steady. And so we could draw from that side of the portfolio. And I think that's important to kind of note is that once you've got this asset allocation set, this is going to drive portfolio decisions in the future. So if they need that $60,000, let's say we went through a good year for the stock market. Let's use 2024 as an example. Equities outperform fixed income. So if they were taking out that $60,000, we like to follow the portfolio management rule where we want to sell the winners. We don't want to sell the losers. So if we're going to be selling the winners, where are we going to be drawing that $60,000 from? It's going to be the equity side in 2024. Okay. Boom, $60,000. So we're going to take some of those gains off the table and avoid selling the fixed income at the lower point. And we actually potentially want to even buy fixed income in years like 2024, take additional gains off the table from the big tech. And that's literally what we did going into 2025. We said, let me take some of the gains off the table we've experienced, not going to abandon equities, but we're going to take some of the gains off the table, spin off the income that our clients need for cash flow, and then even rebalance the portfolio to get this 40% back to the target allocation. Let's say on the flip side, we went through a 2008, 2009. So 2008, equities were down 37%, but fixed income, by the way, that year was positive 6%. So in that scenario, where are we going to take the 60,000 from? We don't want to sell low. We don't want to sell the equities down. We're going to take the 60,000 from here. Okay. So this is that disciplined, unemotional, repeatable process. We like to call this DERP. This is what we coach our clients on is once we have this target allocation, this is going to be driving our portfolio management decisions going forward, not only from an investment perspective, but also for cash flow needs from the portfolio. For that, why don't we transition into cash flow? Okay, let's talk about this phase one of income plan. So phase one, we've got a few things broken down here. So first of all, very up here, I mentioned their income goal. $6,000 a month is their fixed need, okay, in terms of just basic lifestyle expenses. And then they have an additional $10,000 a year for travel. Okay. But we need to gross that up. We need to take into consideration taxes. So if we use a 15% effective rate, and if we say, okay, how do we budget in taxes? We're going to need a gross income of approximately $96,000. Okay. This is just ballpark. Okay. Obviously it depends on federal, state, all that kind of stuff. But let's say $96,000 in this scenario is sort of what the total gross income goal is. So there's a couple of things I wrote down here: income floor and income gap. So income floor is basically how much fixed income are you receiving? Okay. And at this point in time, Jane did elect a pension. So we're going to put the income floor during this first phase of $14,500. Okay, so $14,500 is that income floor, but they need $96,000. So if we take $96,000 minus $14,500, we have an income gap of $81,500. So $81,500 is the income gap. So where could we get that income from? Obviously, the IRA would be sort of that next level. Or we could take Social Security, okay? And so these are some decisions that need to be made right away. And by the way, John, he could take Social Security at 62. He's eligible this year. And so his benefit at 62 would be $21,960. I just wanted to compare baseline for Jane, her income at 62, not that she's 62 now, she's 61, but her Social Security benefit is $25,200. So the lesson here is Jane's benefit is a little higher, okay? And when it comes to taking early versus delaying, one of the considerations is survivor benefits and maxing out the larger of the two benefits. So in this case, it might make sense for us to delay Jane's a little bit longer relative to John's because her benefit is higher. And on the surface, if they didn't take anything from Social Security, let's say they decided to delay both of their benefits, because that's oftentimes the default advice. Hey, delay until 70, you'll get the maximum benefit amount. Well, here's the challenge with that. If we look at the income gap of $81,500 and we divide that into the IRA balance of $1 million, that would result in a withdrawal rate of 8.15%. So if we kind of think about the 4% rule, which I'm not a fan just to follow the 4% rule, but if we think about the 4% rule, we're now more than double the 4% rule, okay? And so this was part of what made them so uncomfortable and like why they just didn't really know what to do with the investments. They didn't want to go back to work. They wanted to figure out a plan. That's why they reached out to me in the first place. But 8.15%, even for me, a little uncomfortable, okay? Especially because, like I said, we're transitioning out of a couple of years of back-to-back really, really good returns of the market. Let me get on my crystal ball. I could potentially see some volatility in 2025 or 2026 because inflation is still a challenge. Tariffs are now becoming real, okay? There's a lot of uncertainty right now with the market, so I could see some additional volatility. If we're withdrawing 8.15% of the portfolio and the IRA is now dropping in value, the rate of withdrawal now goes up even higher, okay? So there's some concerns there, rightly so. And so the election there, what we decided to do, what we ended up doing, spoiler alert, is we ended up taking John's Social Security straight away. Because like I said, Jane is not even eligible. So that's not even a factor in this first phase, this first year of retirement. But we are going to go ahead and take John's Social Security at $21,960. Now what we have is we have an income floor of $36,460 and an income gap of $59,540. So if you take $59,540 and divide that by the IRA balance of $1 million, WD is withdrawal. Now our rate of withdrawal it dropped down to 6%. So instead of drawing 8.15% just for the benefit of John delaying Social Security, we didn't like that. We said, let's go down to 6. 6% is a little bit more palatable right now. And then let's reevaluate Jane's Social Security decision when she turns 62, okay? Which we're going to talk about that next. Okay, so now let's fast forward. Let's fast forward into the next year. And now Jane's 62 and John is 63. John's already elected Social Security. And we're going to try to do our best just to use today's dollars numbers instead of building in inflation. There's one thing that I did build inflation in for, and that's the future rate of withdrawal later on in their 70s. So we'll talk about that later. But for now, let's try to use today's dollars. So Jane's benefit, like I said, is $25,200 when she turns 62. So right now, year one, 6% rate of withdrawal. We'll see what happens with the markets over the next year. That'll determine what the second year rate of withdrawal is. Okay. If the portfolio value went up, the rate of withdrawal will drop a little bit. If the market pulled the portfolio down, the rate of withdrawal will increase. And then we'll need to make some decisions. Does it make sense to cut expenses a little bit, depending on how bad things are at that point? But we'll sort of address that at that point in time. But it's also sort of a reminder that the Social Security decisions could also be aligned with some of those uncertainties with the market. Like if the markets are rocking and rolling for the next few years, Jane could just continue to delay Social Security because of that reason, because it aligns with the longevity risk we talked about, inflation risk. Social Security is going to increase with cost of living adjustments. And if something changed on the flip side, if we had a bear market or a recession, she could elect to turn that Social Security benefit on at any point in time after 62 and reduce that portfolio withdrawal, try to rescue her portfolio that way. So it doesn't have to be one of those things where like, I planned to delay it until 70 and I have to do that. She could elect to take it earlier if she wanted to, but that's still an open discussion at this point in time. But on the surface, I wanted to kind of show you this, is that if she did claim Social Security at 62, obviously we just talked about her benefit of $25,200. This would drop their income gap all the way down to $34,800. Okay, because we would add this on top of we had the income floor of John's Social Security, the pension, and then now we have Jane's Social Security benefit. So in total, their income goal or their total income would be about $60,000. Okay, a little over $60,000. So their income gap was about $34,000. So on the surface, you could say, you know what? Let's take the $34,000, divide that by 1 million. Now we're sub 3.5% rate of withdrawal in that second year of retirement when she's 62, he's 63. So on the surface, it's like, hey, now we're below 4%. We're below the 4% rule. This seems kind of like a no-brainer. But what happens is this, they're locking in the lower benefit for the higher earning spouse. And so we already talked about the survivor benefit, but we're also now bringing a little bit more of inflation into the risk into the picture, a little bit more of longevity risk into the picture. Okay, she does have longevity on her side. And by her delaying until 70, the break-even point is only 79 relative to her claiming at 62. It's very likely she would live past 79 based on her health profile, et cetera. Another thing is the taxation of Social Security. So I talked a little about this on the Whiteboard Fireside Chat last week. And so if you missed that Whiteboard Fireside Chat in our YouTube, go ahead and check that out. I talked a little about the taxation of Social Security and kind of how you can sort of play the income game and the timing of Social Security and Roth conversions to maximize the tax efficiency of your Social Security benefits. But if she just elected to take Social Security right away, it impacts the Roth conversion decision a little bit, okay? Because then she's not able to convert as much to max out the optimal bracket, spoiler alert, which for them is 12%, okay? So we didn't really love the idea of her just taking Social Security at 62 because, again, the rate of withdrawal of 6% is not super concerning. We can sustain that for a period of time, knowing that at 70, if she elected to delay it all the way until 70, that's going to really bring her rate of withdrawal down substantially. So I think the taxes is a big one. And also the ability to do those Roth conversions during this Roth conversion window is what I like to call it, which is basically now up until she's age 75. So instead, what we did was we said, hey, you know what? Let's delay Social Security, okay? Let's delay Social Security. Let's keep that withdrawal rate at 6%. The income gap, like we know, is around 60K. Okay, so that's the income gap. The income floor is around 36,000. Okay, let's continue on with that 6% rate of withdrawal, but then let's also do a little bit of additional conversions on top of this. Okay, she's got a little bit of room over and above what she's going to be recognized for gross income from pension, Social Security, and also these IRA distributions to max out the targeted rate of 12% on the federal level. Okay, so again, this one is hard because it involves projecting out what the lifetime tax brackets are going to be for her. It involves sort of getting on her crystal ball and looking at what her son's tax bracket's going to be. But ultimately, it is important for them to maximize legacy to their son. And he is a high income earning professional already. He has children of his own. They want the money to be useful and when they pass away. And so part of that consideration is the tax impact of those distributions in the back end. I can probably say with a high degree of certainty that he is well above the 12% bracket at this point in time, and they agree with that as well. And so just by that alone, them going ahead and maxing out that 12% of federal rate with Roth conversions made a lot of sense for them. And so the amount that they would be converting is about $26,000 on top of those additional distributions that would be taken from the portfolio. So 6% would be coming out of the IRA as cash flow needs. And then the other $26,000 approximately would be coming out of the IRA to convert over to Roth. And we looked at the balance sheet in the beginning. They have a little bit of cash on hand, a little bit of savings on hand. So they could use that to pay some of the taxes in the beginning. But again, they don't want to deplete that aggressively over the next couple of years and just have $0 in savings. They want to have a little bit of a buffer. So they're going to have to even pay the taxes from the IRA, which oftentimes that's a reason to either sort of avoid Roth conversions or delay or reduce Roth conversions. And so it's a consideration. We looked at this one, but it still made sense. It's the numbers still really looked really, really attractive to even max out the 12% effective rate, even after they use cash savings to pay the taxes. And so what I mean by that is they're going to be having to withdraw a little bit more from the IRA not only for the conversion, but also to pay the federal government, because that's the downside of Roth conversions. You pay the taxes today, okay? As opposed to, if the money was still in the tax deferred account, you would be deferring that taxable income. So it's just a consideration. But if we did that, and let's say she delayed Social Security until 70, watch what happens. So watch what happens here. So now we have Jane's Social Security. We check that off. That has grown all the way up to $45,000. So it started at $25,000 at 62. And this ignores any inflation, like I mentioned. So in today's dollars, $45,000. We've got John's Social Security that we've been claiming, $21,960. The pension, $14,500. So now we have an income floor. Look at this, $81,000. So now the gap is $15,000. Okay. And look what over here. Look what happened to the IRA. Instead of it being $1 million, it did drop a little bit because a little bit more aggressive rates of withdrawal. So this is the one thing I did use some future value here just to let you know. But $971,000 would be the value of the portfolio at age 70, Jane's age 70, of which $475,000 would still be in the tax deferred side, but then almost $500,000, $496,000 in the Roth side. So instead of being basically 100% in tax deferred, now it's a nice even split 50-50 between the tax deferred and tax free. If both of them had unexpectedly passed away at that point in time, now that legacy is much more efficient that they would pass on to their son. But even though the portfolio dropped a little bit to 971 because of slightly higher aggressive rates of withdrawal, obviously paying some of the taxes on the conversions, the rate of withdrawal rate goes down to all the way to 1.5% because we took the gap of 15,000, divided that into the 971. So 1.5% rate of withdrawal, now the portfolio is going to be able to recover. So let's say the expected return is maybe 6% a year. They're going to be earning a 4.5% rate of return on top of the rate of withdrawal. Okay, so now their portfolio is going to be able to recover. But the best part is the portfolio is going to be recovering not with 100% in tax deferred, but with an even split basically between tax deferred and tax free. So this is just going to get better and better. And now the conversation comes to this is like, do we continue Roth conversions now past 70? Now they're taking Social Security. Taxable income goes up. There's probably a little bit of a smaller Roth conversion window between 70 and 75 when she's going to have to take RMDs. Okay, but there could be reasons to leave the money in some tax deferred assets. So it's something that we'll continue to evaluate over time. But a few of those reasons could be number one, maybe they're charitably inclined. Okay, maybe over time they want to give more to charity. We've talked about this before already, but I think they're trying to wrap their head around like just taking care of their own income now. I think this is very, very common for the clients that are just recently retired. They just want to wrap their head around like being secure with their own retirement income. After they've done that for a few years or maybe even a decade plus, sometimes they're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to start gifting a little bit more to my children. Or I'm going to start gifting a little bit more to charity because things have played out so well for them, hopefully, because they have a good financial plan in place. So, but charitable goals could be part of the equation in terms of not converting all of their IRA over to Roth. Okay. And it could be, hey, you know what? Maybe we can do some qualified charitable distributions, or maybe we can leave this asset part of this IRA to charity because the charities are not going to pay taxes on those distributions. It could also be the tax landscape. Maybe the tax landscape changes over time and tax rates go up. And they're like, you know what? Instead of, we don't want to convert anymore because now we're having to pay taxes at a much higher rate than we did at the beginning of retirement. Okay. So tax landscape. Another thing is self-funding long-term care. Okay. And, this is one of those discussion points we're going to be having with them at this phase. Now that we've solved for their investment strategy, we've already solved for their income plan. We've begun the Roth conversion strategy already with them. Is, what is going to be the long-term care plan? We're agnostic to the solution on this one. We're not insurance agents. We don't sell long-term care insurance. I'm a big believer in long-term care insurance for many, many reasons that I've talked about before in this podcast. But ultimately, what we need to figure out is like, if they plan to self-fund long-term care for a portion of their long-term care need, maybe they buy some insurance, but like, you know what? It's probably not going to cover 100% of a long-term care need, especially if it was prolonged or maybe it was memory care, like 24/7 memory care at the end of life. They could use that IRA as a way to self-fund long-term care. And I talked a little bit about this on the podcast last week. Reasons not to convert your Roth or your IRA to Roth is that medical expenses that exceed 7.5% of your adjusted gross income are then added to your itemized deductions. And if you end up itemizing your deductions because of these medical costs, maybe you need long-term care, part of those IRA distributions could be then tax deductible. So it's another reason to say, you know what, maybe we keep a little bit of money inside of this tax deferred vehicle for some of those reasons. But again, we've got room. We're looking at their lifetime tax bracket, assuming tax brackets didn't change dramatically over time. even with this income floor, they've got a little bit of room to do some potential conversions throughout their 70s. And if they did that, she could fully convert her IRA over to Roth by around age 83. And at that point in time, 100% of her IRA would be in a Roth account. She would have no dollars inside of the traditional IRA. She'd have no required minimum distributions. And now the legacy is maximized from a tax efficiency standpoint to her son. But again, there could be reasons to leave a little bit of money in there, the charitable goals, the self-funding long-term care, as well as potential tax landscape changes and just changes in preferences in general, when it comes to planning. And this is why I like to say, financial planning is not an event, it's a process, and things change, life changes, your family's going to change, your health's going to change. So it's very, very important just to continue to note that hey, just because you've got something in pencil doesn't mean you need to follow that plan exactly to the T over the next 15, 20 years. Most of the time I see clients adjusting their plan based on circumstances that are both in their control and even out of their control. Okay, but I hope you all found this Whiteboard Retirement Plan to be helpful. They're in a great position here. They've got a lot of options. And hopefully you also took that takeaway as well. It's they could do a lot of different things with Social Security. You got to weigh the pros and cons. Every decision that you make has pros and has cons. There's never a scenario where this is a home run, because that involves your assumptions being 100% right. You know what I mean? On longevity, on inflation, on your rate of return, on whether or not you're going to need long-term care down the road, on the tax landscape. So your inflations have to be 100% accurate in order for your decisions to be right. So it's impossible, in my opinion. And that's why we believe that it's more of an art than a science. And you need to align those decisions with what feels good to you from a behavioral standpoint. If you're making aggressive Roth conversions in the beginning and you're delaying Social Security and you're also doing heavy rated withdrawal and you're losing sleep at night because of that, because you're seeing your portfolio balance go down by paying all these taxes and you're aggressive, that may not be a good decision. Even though on paper it seems optimal based on the numbers, you might say, you know what, I'm going to elect Social Security and I'm also going to take Jane's Social Security at 62 as well, because then our rate of withdrawal drops substantially. But then you have to weigh the pros and cons of that decision. So each decision, with the income planning, the investment strategy, the tax optimization, the risk management, the insurance planning, the estate planning, all of those have pros and cons. And that's why I always encourage you. This is educational purposes only. Obviously I'm going through an actual client example, but your situation is going to be unique to you. And so make sure you consult your own advisors, your own financial professionals before making any changes. And as always, I always invite you, if you're interested in learning more about working with us one-on-one, fill out that retirement readiness questionnaire. We'd love to learn more about you and how we can help you in your retirement planning journey. And of course, make sure to follow our podcast, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.